Hi, my name is Bob Iser. I'm the Senior Vice President of Global Quality Management at Amneal Pharmaceuticals. It's my pleasure to be able to provide some industry perspectives on generic drug product development challenges and also research priorities for the next 5 years as part of this public workshop. So I think a good place to start is looking at overall enhanced communications, workshops, and educational tools for the development of complex generic drug products and also alternative bioequivalence approaches that FDA and industry may be considering for complex and other products. From a regulatory approval perspective, industry is often requesting clear, specific expectations from FDA during the life cycle of ANDA reviews and approvals. If we were able to have this enhanced communication, additionally workshops and other educational tools, this will really help the generic industry to meet FDA expectations for timely approval and also help the FDA manage workload of these complex products to be able to get them out and available and accessible to the U.S. patients. Some examples, and we'll touch upon some of these later on in other slides, is a request to FDA to present detailed case studies clearly showing generic industry the expectations of FDA. And this will really help reduce cycles and increase first cycle approvals. And you'll see a couple examples of case studies that we want to bring up as potential areas where there could be communication and additional research done to be able to help industry and the patients. We also request FDA to share current thinking on the validation of population PK or PBPK models when these modeling approaches are used to demonstrate bioequivalence. And I'll talk a little bit about this in a future slide. And also look at reimagining post-CR meeting requests that shouldn't just be limited to clarification questions. So providing industry an opportunity and the flexibility to ask targeted questions, and FDA also to ask some questions so that there could be a dialogue, again, to be able to improve the communications when it comes to expectations, but also at the end of the day, move along the approval process of these critical medications. So specifically, let's look at immunogenicity testing for peptide drugs. FDA has been presenting information about immunogenicity testing from a scientific perspective, but there is a lack of clarity on the regulatory pathways and how to go about using those during the development and during the life cycle of ANDA products. So there's some gaps as we see them. One, asking FDA to present detailed case studies showing the generic drug industry the expectations related to innate and adaptive immunity testing, which will help reduce review cycles, as I mentioned before, and also be able to have clarity around those expectations. At the early stages of product development, asking targeted questions related to this type of testing may not be feasible in a pre-ANDA meeting. In many cases, industry is, in the case that we've been hearing, is learning more from consultants than from FDA because those consultants are working in these areas on a daily basis. So we're really asking FDA to consider other types of meetings or avenues to have that enhanced communication so that applicants may pose questions. Industry is asking to have a conversation with FDA to get answers to questions about these types of studies and testing, specifically for peptide drugs. And an inability to get clarity from FDA will delay product development and ultimately product approval. As I mentioned before, population pharmakinetic or oral PBPK modeling when pivotal fasting or fed studies fail only due to the inclusion of statistical outliers is a challenging area that industry is facing. Failure of pivotal fasting or fed BE studies due to statistical outliers is a common phenomenon. Exclusion of these outliers is not accepted by FDA. Therefore, studies are repeated with increased sample sizes, increased costs, and delaying the approval of many critical medications. We see some regulatory gaps here and ask that FDA share current thinking on using these models, PK and PBPK models to demonstrate bioequivalence and not then go to repeating the BE studies when pivotal studies fail only due to the inclusion of statistical outliers. So recruitment of similar ratio of male and female studies is not always possible in BE studies. And that's currently a challenge that we're trying to overcome in the industry. So we're looking at, can population PK or PBPK modeling be used to justify recruitment of subjects from a single gender, or when recruitment of a similar ratio of male-female subjects is not always possible, and maybe have a discussion about case studies or other FDA expectations or experiences. And also looking to see if there's a way, now with more global harmonization approaches, to repurpose BE data submitted to other jurisdictions. Example, generics versus, say, an EU RLD for submission to FDA. This, I think, will give us a chance for significant time and cost savings using these types of models, and a faster pathway for regulatory approval, which is beneficial to industry, FDA, and ultimately the patients. Another area I think that there's an opportunity for additional research and additional communications is the use of in silico methods, especially around the evaluation of regional lung deposition for inhalation products. Through published papers, FDA is providing scientific framework about in silico modeling approaches to evaluate regional lung deposition for inhalation products, using, for example, computational fluid dynamics, CFD. We see some gaps, some regulatory gaps that I think would be beneficial to fill with additional research and additional communications and dialogue between industry and FDA. So FDA does need to provide clear expectations about the validation around CFD. And again, I think it's helpful to see detailed case studies on pivotal CFD data that's needed for approval. Regulatory flexibility in the validation approaches for CFD when minimal literature data is available. And I think that this type of approach is also then applicable to use and consideration of other alternate bioequivalence approaches, which again are going to be used more and more as we're developing additional complex generic products. So another area, long-acting injectables. FDA recommends bioequivalence studies in patients due to safety concerns, and there are very few LAI products from a generic perspective approved. During pre-ANDA meetings, sponsors submit pilot BE studies, typically 1 to 2 pilot BE studies with somewhere between 30 and 50 subjects in each pilot BE study in healthy subjects. So industry is looking to see, is there a way for FDA to be more flexible by leveraging safety data in healthy subjects from multiple pilot BE studies from different sponsors for the same drug product, and then be able to revise the draft product-specific guidances to be able to put in those considerations. So in this case, single-dose BE studies in healthy subjects instead of multiple-dose BE studies in patients. Again, significant time and cost savings, faster pathways to regulatory approval, and a positive impact to the public health, yielding alternative and affordable generic therapies for patients are all the goal of the industry and FDA. And I think this is an area where additional research and additional communication and dialogue with FDA, especially around looking at case studies, would be helpful. One other area, in vitro permeation testing, IVPT, for topical drug products. So difficult approval for ANDAs with IVPT studies. It's very difficult. So the regulatory burden is increasing, has increased for these types of products. Requirement for skin donors from multiple skin banks is not always feasible. So those are some of the regulatory challenges. We see there, again, to be the possibility of additional conversations, dialogue, and research, requesting FDA to publish product-specific guidances, then incorporate some of the common things they're seeing as deficiencies or issues related to these IVPT studies. Again, detailed case studies would also be helpful for industry to have those conversations and clearly lay out what the expectations are from FDA. Deficiencies related to these types of studies can be shared during pre-ANDA meetings, published on the website, or as I mentioned, be worked into the product-specific guidances if the issues are from a product-specific nature. So industry really wishes to have further dialogue with FDA to share these concerns, and I think that's an area where we could have a workshop or some other type of dialogue. So there's a couple other areas as I wrap up that I want to propose. Maybe not from a research perspective, but definitely from a development and life cycle challenge perspective. So one is impurities in APIs and drug products. I think it's been pretty well publicized that there are there's a lot of information from FDA in terms of nitrosamine impurities. But I think there's further clarity that's needed from FDA. So again, how do we deal with these impurities as part of development and as part of the life cycle as you're going through and making post-approval changes? I think there's an opportunity for additional dialogue there. We've seen an uptick in more communications and expectations around nitrosamine-like impurities related to specific APIs. And again, in some cases, going back to the drawing board when it comes to a product that's been approved from a development perspective leads to challenges, especially for something that's very complex. And then how do we use this approach for other products with other impurity concerns, the azido compounds that are now being communicated about, or what's next? So we see challenges here. Again, one, how to deal with the current concerns around specific impurities, but also what is that next set of problematic impurities that may be something that FDA is thinking about? What's the process that FDA is using to identify this next set of impurities that may be something we have to consider as industry? Or is there an opportunity for us to also discuss about impurities that we think might be something that needs to be addressed? And I think this lack of clarity and communication from FDA impacts product development and really provides challenges from a post-approval lifecycle management perspective. So we're looking at, could we have something like a biannual collaborative workshop on how to deal with these impurities or the next set of impurities that may be a challenge for the industry in total. And then the last issue I wanted to bring up was early communication when it comes to data integrity issues, especially around clinical research organizations. So the generic drug industry is striving to deal with CROs that don't have quality or compliance issues. As most people know, recently regulators identified data integrity issues at a few CROs that impacted a large number of ANDAs from a therapeutic rating, but also delayed approvals of many of these ANDAs. I think that the gap is that early communication with industry about potential data integrity issues with the CROs so that industry may pivot to assure study data reliability is very important. If studies have already been provided to FDA, then we need to go back and start thinking about what needs to be done during the life cycle or soon after approval or during the approval process to be able to manage what studies may be repeated, what data would need to be reanalyzed. And waiting for the FDA investigation to be complete is too late and will lead to numerous problems downstream, including drug shortages, repeat bioequivalent studies, which are very expensive, and then an enormous public health burden. So patients may not then have access to these critical, in some cases already approved, affordable medications. I think it's incumbent on us to consider all these things when it comes to the reliability of the data, and as soon as FDA sees something, to be able to provide that clarity to industry so that the industry can react and in a timely manner to be able to show that product that's already out there on the market that's been approved is bioequivalent and will not cause any safety or quality concerns to the patients who are desperately needing and using those products. So again, I want to thank the FDA and the organizers for inviting me to provide some perspectives, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of the 2 days of this workshop and that we have a chance for further dialogue. Thank you very much.